they were beginning to diminish anyway. But with the Filipinos, you had an interesting kind of a situation because they were now American nationals, and they did not necessarily come under the restrictions. So as a result, they began to bring in Filipinos to fill in the void that had been created by the loss of the large Japanese and Chinese immigration groups.
So you mean Filipinos were considered American nationals at one time?
They were not only considered American nationals, they were officially described as American nationals. And
Oh,
so
really?
as such, they they could be brought into the territory, but they were not considered American citizens.
Oh, they're like the Micronesians and
And the Portu-
the Port
the Puerto
the
Ricans
Puerto
and all of the
Ricans.
others here now, they and actually the old Hawaiians at one time here now, not quite citizens, um, but at least they could call themselves American for tax purposes.
How were Filipinos accepted by Hawaiians when they first came?
Well, for the Hawaiians, we had already had experience with Chinese and Japanese, and each group was different. For
Yeah, yeah.
example, when the Chinese came here, the Hawaiians took a look at the Chinese and said, "Okay, fine, whatever." But the Chinese had been coming since right after the British came, because the Chinese quite often, when the British went to China, would hijack Chinese, and when they got to Hawaii, then they could jump ship. And the British practice of hijacking Chinese, by the way, uh, got named for the city where the hijacking took place, and that was called Shanghai. So,
Oh, really?
oh yeah, and so
Oh,
if
see,
you were Shanghaied,
I did not know that. Oh, so that's why you get that Shanghai. You
oh
were
yeah, if
Shanghai.
you were Shanghaied, you were kidnapped. That was basically because a lot of the ships lost crew members through illness or through accident or something along that line. They had to go get extra people. So you went into a Chinese seaport over here now. Some poor unsuspecting Chinese got conked on the head, and when he awoke, he was at sea and was given two choices: swim back or stay on the boat and leave when you got to the next port. And so many of the Chinese got off in
Oh,
Hawaii,
oh,
but they had
really?
been Shanghaied.
Wow. So did Hawaiians and Filipinos did they mix well, or was it did they prefer more to stay with the Filipino? Because we're talking, how long ago was this? That
Okay, this
uh,
is around the turn of the century. You have
okay,
to understand at
yeah.
this time the Hawaiians are going through an upheaval of their own, because
Right, right.
basically, they're not trusting anybody at this point here,
Yeah,
and they're being
sure,
treated
sure.
as bad as everybody else is being treated.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
their major concern, of course, is how they're going to retain their identity with all of this cultural pluralism that is beginning to occur. And the Filipinos, of course, as well as the Japanese and the Chinese, are all trying to see if they can retain their um, identity as well. Keeping in mind that when you have the Chinese, not only do they speak a different language, but they speak different languages, because there's not one Chinese language. There are a whole bunch of Chinese languages.
Yeah, there's tons. Like even in the Philippines, there's so many dialects.
Exactly. And so
Mhm.
you have the Visayans and the Ilocanos, and you have all of those others over there. And so, you can't say that's a Filipino, what kind of Filipino, and this kind of thing.
Right.
And for the Hawaiians, they don't know any difference. The other thing is that the Hawaiians historically had been a lunar people. What I mean by this is that their calendar had been based on the moon and the phases thereof. And so the old story here, mad dogs and Englishmen go out in the noonday sun. For the Hawaiians, they did not like they did not like to work in the middle of the day when it was super duper hot.
Well,
Uh,
who does?
yeah, well,
I guess the Filipino farmers
the Filipino farmers were
were just
used to
fine.
that,
Yeah,
and
that's
so they began to accept that, as a matter of course, if they were going to be able to survive. And to that first generation who came over here, the Sabadongs and all of the others
the
over here who worked,
cicadas. Yeah,
and I mean, they worked
they worked
hard.
until now.
We talk about the sacrifices made by the Japanese, then of course the Chinese, but the Filipinos, they worked hard, and they worked long for something like 12 cents a week, and this kind of stuff. Um, and they accepted it. For many of them, they came over as single men, and as a result, later on, um, some families could come, and some women, but basically in many instances now, as the Filipino women begin to have children, many of the single men began to be adopted into families as what were called apos. And so as a result, these single men helped to raise the babies. When I was a youngster, I used to run around with my Filipino friends, and they'd always introduce you auntie, uncle, cousin, grandma, grandpa, and apo. And I'm going, apo, what's an apo? And apo, see, is very, very conscious and strong member of the family, which, for the Hawaiians is, something that we can accept very much so, the extended family and the person who is going to stay tied to the family for a long time.
You mentioned that mostly men came here, mostly Filipino men in the
Yeah, and this
beginning.
was true of the Chinese initially, and especially the Japanese. Later on, the Japanese corrected their problem by bringing in the picture brides, and that's an interesting story. The Chinese came over here, and many of them found that they could stay here if they married Hawaiian women. They also found that nobody who was a non-Hawaiian could own land, and they'd already seen that the Haoles, if they wanted to learn to own land, married Hawaiians. So their big thing was married Hawaiian. If you go to the basic, the A letter of the
Directory.
Hawaiian telephone directory, for example, take a
Uh-huh.
look at all of those Hawaiian names.
Hmm.
90% of them are basically Hawaiianization of Chinese names.
That's amazing. So how did the Japanese had the picture brides, the Chinese married Hawaiians. What happened to the Filipinos? How did they have mate or how did they find their
The
yeah,
Filipinos basically trying to stay within their culture. You have to understand that you have three things. One, you're going to try to stay with somebody who speaks your language. Okay.
that's important.
And then the other thing is you're going to try and stay with somebody who eats the same kind of food you eat.
That's also very
And then
important.
you also want to stay with somebody who is the same religion, and the Filipinos were Catholic.
Highly important.
And so the Hawaiians, who are
Yeah.
basically Protestant by the missionaries who came, and to a large extent now are Catholic only because of the French at this point over here now. They're sort of in between everybody else in this kind of stuff. So the Hawaiians are kind of taking a look at the Filipinos as okay, another group over here, but we got to solve our own problems and they got to solve their own. So
Mm.
actually, one of the things you want to credit the plantation system with was um, the integration of a number of the groups that were in Hawaii because of the fact that they played team sports. And the plantation, for example, let's take Waialua as an example. Waialua,
Wailua, lovely Wailua.
lovely Waialua would have a Japanese baseball team, a Puerto Rican baseball team, a Chinese baseball team, a Filipino baseball team,
Oh, really? They
and
even have
then
Filipino.
they would play, say, Kahuku Plantation. And
Oh, really?
and so it's Wailua against Kahuku. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to get the best from your team. So you're
Yeah.
going to have a Filipino catcher, maybe a shortstop. You're going to
Yeah.
have a Japanese pitcher.
Yeah. Yeah.
You may have a Howley first baseman from Howley camp and this kind or main camp and this kind of stuff. And so pretty soon you had the integrated um, plantation baseball team
Oh, really?
that competed against
That's interesting.
Eva, that competed against the neighbor islands, Honoka'a, and this
Yeah.
kind of stuff, and that whole
Oh,
bit.
really?
And those were wild, and those were good fun. And then, of course, you had the other sports like boxing. I remember when I was a small kid, my dad was in love with a Filipino boxer by the name of Dado Marino. And oh my gosh, we used to go to the old, and they were called smokers at that time. And I'm just a little kid dying from cigar smoke
Sure,
and
sure.
the whole bit over there. But my dad would cheer on good old Dado Marino, who came out of Waipahu, and this kind of stuff. So, and then of course I
Well,
grew up in
Brian Valoria now
well,
is
in
a
Brian.
member.
Well, see,
So
my big one at
Donaire now in the Philippines.
well,
So
my big one at this point, my great hero is Ben Villaflor
oh yes,
because
sure.
Ben Villaflor is now one of the most respected men in the state of Hawaii, probably even more than Governor Cayetano,
Yeah.
because he's the president of the Senate. The Senate, rather, he's the sergeant at arms. Nothing goes on in the legislature unless Ben, rather, Ben Villaflor makes it happen because it's kind of like a school. The principal takes credit for running the school, but if his custodians don't know what they're doing, the principal can look bad really, really quick.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Ben
so
Villaflor is my hero. He
yeah,
and
sure.
Benny Agbayani.
Yeah. And a lot of this, certainly throughout the years, a lot of Filipinos have grown into prominence, national, international prominence too. Governor Cayetano to speak,
Exactly.
and I know that your wife, Mrs. Stagner, is her uncle was the first mayor of
Yeah,
Hawaiian descent.
my wife was born on Kauai, and
Mm-hmm.
so as a result now, and she was born into a plantation family from
Mm-hmm.
Grove Farm. Her father was a supervisor. Her grandfather was an accountant,
Hmm.
and so therefore, but
So
her,
they're professionals.
yeah,
They weren't laborers.
right. And so basically, they wanted their children to become professionals also. So my
Hmm.
wife and her side of the family, for example, became school teachers.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
Uncle Eddie was supposed to become a school teacher, but after he was in the military, he used his GI Bill to go to Notre Dame, where he became an attorney and then came back as an attorney. But you had those very goal-driven Filipino families who wanted something better than going back to the plantation.
Hmm.
But on the other side, we had relatives who are still part of that old plantation heritage and still work super hard and do all the Uncle Luke and all of those others over there who were the irrigation people and this kind of stuff and
Hmm.
did the real back-breaking work that to a large extent now is being lost on this generation because they don't know how hard their ancestors worked.
What do you think about that, Uncle Ish, with all these younger generations? And I'm sure many of them are, got a good head. They study, they work, but then many of them also get lost. Well, what do you think about that that shift?
Well, see, and that's not unique to the Filipinos. It's unique to the Hawaiians. It's unique to the Japanese. It's unique to the Hawaiians. When I was going to school at UCLA, for example, I used to run around with a lot of Japanese Americans, and some of those, and sometimes when I'd run around with those Japanese who'd been raised in Los Angeles and California, I was the one who was using the chopsticks, and I was the one who was eating the rice. I mean, they just simply had adjusted and adapted to living in California.
Yeah,
And
they're
so for
Californians. They're not even.
they're Californians
Yeah.
or they're Americans and they weren't Japanese. Later on, when I uh, got exposed to some organizations like JAPL, the Japanese American Political Action League, and they began to push for things like a rediscovery of Manzanar and then ultimately reparations and this kind of stuff. Um, then you begin to rediscover that. But one of the reasons, as I talked to those old Japanese people at that time, they wanted to do that because they wanted their children and their grandchildren to know what the sacrifices were that they had made, especially during the Second World War. And I grew up during the Second World War, and I saw the Japanese who were in the relocation camps over here. And then later on, when I come back, and now I hear through various government sources and this kind of stuff that no, we never had relocation camps over here. If we had one, we only had one at Sand Island. I'm going, hey, wait. I lived over on the leeward side of the island there, and I know that we had one over in Honouliuli. And so basically, but something's trying to be hidden. But the fact of the matter is that's a major part of Japanese history. Filipino history is not much different, especially when you go back and you see how loyal and faithful the Filipinos were, particularly in the early days of the Second World War when they died protecting American military.
Wow, Uncle Ish, that's amazing. Right now we have Uncle Ish brought with him some books, and I'm looking one right now. It is called Kumuhula, Roots and Branches, and this is a book written by Dr. Stagner, Uncle Ish. And you said this is a very popular. Oh, you were once a very you're instrumental in Hawaiian dance, yeah, male Hawaiian dance.
Well, I was born into a Hawaiian hula family. My mother was a kumu hula from the old school. In fact, she
Kumuhula.
learned her hula from one of the old legends, a man called Joseph Ilala Ole, when he was teaching at the old um, uh, George Mossman's Lalani village, where the St. Augustine's is now. And so I was raised in that milieu, and so I knew many of the people that my mom ran around with, like John Almeida and Alvin Isaacs, Bill Lincoln, Angelina Guerrero, Hilo Hattie, all of those there, because I was raised with them, Auntie Iolani Luahine. Then later on, to work my way through college, I had a unique opportunity uh, to dance hula because there weren't male dancers or there weren't very many in Hawaii in the 1950s. And so by accident, I took a dare and then became a hula dancer, and then found out there were two major advantages. One, I got paid, and two, I got exposed to some really cute female dancers because there were a whole bunch of cute girls
I
dancing
bet.
hula, not very many male dancers. So you
Oh,
tagged on to all of the major hula groups that were around at that time.
oh, you got that going on there, Uncle Ish. That's a good way to have it. The only guy among these beautiful hula dancing women.
Oh yeah, well, it's interesting now because I meet and I talk with a lot of their grandchildren and this kind of stuff, and so I share my stories and this kind of stuff. I'm
Yeah.
no relic from that period of time, but see, that was the rejuvenation, that was the rediscovery of the whole culture, particularly in the post-statehood era.
Yeah.
And the people who were responsible for that were the people into whose milieu I was born and who I knew as a little kid. People like Mary Kabenapukui, for example, Iolani Luahini, Edith Kanaka Ole, Alice Tamake Lua, to mention briefly.
Do you speak the language? Do you speak Hawaiian language?
Unfortunately, I was part of that generation that was denied the opportunity to learn the
Oh
language.
man.
Well, I had a very severe personal uh, experience with that. I came back to my mom one day when I was in the eighth grade at Kamehameha, and I said, "Mom, I hear you talking with auntie and uncles and everybody else, and you all speak Hawaiian, and yet you won't speak Hawaiian to me and you won't let me learn. I go to Kamehameha and I'm learning Spanish and I'm learning French. And
Hmm.
why am I not learning Hawaiian?" And then she said, "Well, I want you to know that when I was a little kid, I was punished for speaking Hawaiian. That is never going to happen to you. You are never going to be humiliated because you can't speak English. So if you want to make me happy and proud of you, you will learn English to the best of your ability because nobody's going to pay you for being a Hawaiian."
Wow, Uncle Ish. I know we're just getting started, but that is our half hour, and I wanna thank you. He told me, he said, an hour is not even enough. It just gets us going. But, um, you know, I, I want to let everybody know that Uncle Ish, actually, you can find his website. Okay. And his website is www.uncleishstagner.net. Okay. Uncleishstagner.net. And if you go there, you're going to find out that you can call him to teach you and let you know and give you that Hawaiian experience. And uh, can they call you?
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. In fact, I have if they want to use my regular email address, it's just uncleish.stagner@gmail.com. I love talking to people. The main reason, I quote know so much unquote is because the kupuna or the old people were willing to share with me. So now that I'm an older person, it's my
you have to share.
responsibility to share. Oh yeah, I would hate to drop dead one of these times, and I'm getting towards that. And meet my kupuna on the other side of the veil, and they'll say,
Yeah,
"And what did you do with the information we gave you?" "Well, I kept it with me until I died." And they're going to say, "That isn't what we wanted you to do.
yeah.
We gave it to you so you would share." So, I'll sit down and I'll bala'au and I'll talk. I'm part Portuguese anyway, so I was vaccinated with a phonograph needle. So I'll share because there's a lot to learn, and we're all in the same canoe at this point over here now. And if we don't take care of our canoe, we're all gonna sink together.
Very well said, Uncle Ish. And on behalf of KPHI Radio, the management, the staff here, the owners, and everybody who runs the station here, I just want to say mahalo, mahalo nui loa. Thank you very much. Maraming maraming salamat sa inyong pagkadalaw dito sa ating programa. And I hope that we can make this a periodic thing where you can share more because, broadcasting, this gives us a way so you can share your stories to a wider range of people. And it would just be involving me here, you, and then the radio. So thank you very much. And I hope to see you again soon. I hope you'll be able to come back again on the program.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Yeah, and I would like to come back, and hopefully one of these times we'll be able to get Q&A and this kind of stuff, and I can talk with your listeners, see if you have some and this kind of stuff over here. But I would love to talk with your audience.
Okay. All right. We'll do that. We'll do that, Uncle Ish. And again, I want to say thank you very much. The website is uncleishstagner.net. All right. And the email is uncleish.stagner@gmail.com. Right? Okay. Ayan, mga kababayan. So let's give a nice round of applause for Uncle Ish. Thank you very much, Uncle Ish. I greatly appreciate it. And we're going to take a commercial break right here. And when we come back, we'll have Attorney Roda Yabes Alvarez with her legal Pinoy.
Throughout the state of Hawaii,
Maraming
compliments
salamat
of
po.
Oceanic Time Warner Cable. Tune to Channel 882 on your Oceanic Time Warner digital box. KPHI Multicultural Radio has never sounded so good. Enjoy the best of audio and visual entertainment with Oceanic Time Warner Cable's digital cable service. Call Oceanic Time Warner Cable at 643-2337 and order your digital cable service today.
tulay ng mga Filipino sa magagandang awit at musika. Makikinig kayo sa KPHI #1 Hit Filipino Radio dito sa 96.7 FM AM 1130 OC 882 at PinoyPowerMedia.com.
You are now listening to The Legal Pinoy with attorney Rhoda Yabes Alvarez, a show covering legal issues facing Filipino Americans today. Listen and learn about U.S. and Philippine law, and call in to ask your legal questions or participate in on-the-air discussions. The information highlighted in The Legal Pinoy is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. There is no attorney-client relationship established during the show. Here now is attorney Rhoda Yabes Alvarez.